I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily Week in Review. A new study suggests a majority of Canadians are concerned about the spread of COVID-19 in schools, and they want children and staff to wear masks. A countrywide survey of 1,000 people was conducted by the Canadian Hub for Applied and Social Research at the University of Saskatchewan. Even though 89% of respondents said they were vaccinated, 70% said they were still concerned about the spread of the virus in schools in their area, and 78% supported wearing masks in schools. It appears a majority of Canadians think long-term care homes do not currently provide enough safe and reliable care. A survey conducted by the National Institute on Aging will help shape new national standards for long-term care services being drafted by the Health Standards Organization. 67% of respondents did not feel long-term care homes in Canada provide safe, reliable, and high-quality care. That number topped 75% for people who identified as family members, friends, or unpaid caregivers to residents in long-term care. The Trudeau government last year asked the Health Standards Organization to refresh its LTC standards, and the first draft is to be made public early next year. Washington's new COVID travel regulations take effect next month. Canadians immunized with 2 doses of AstraZeneca will be permitted to visit the United States. What this means for those with mixed doses isn't clear. More than 3.9 million Canadians have 2 different doses of Health Canada-approved COVID-19 vaccines. The Public Health Agency of Canada says 1.6 million received AstraZeneca, followed by an mRNA vaccine. Global Affairs Canada says it's working with partners, the U.S. included, to advocate for the recognition of Canada's successful science-based vaccination strategy. Parks Canada is rethinking what the plaques at Prime Minister's grave sites should say and reflect. This is especially in light of historical mistreatment of Indigenous peoples. Experts say this will inevitably cause tension about how to mark the 16 sites. Indigenous leaders say the process will not be easy and will be very uncomfortable. Parks Canada says the wording on the revamped plaques will recognize the enormous shifts in historical understanding, and they will reflect on the past in the context of the present. A top doctor and a Quebec-based bioengineering firm believe history was made last month. This was when an unmanned drone carried a set of lungs for transplant to Toronto General Hospital. Dr. Shaf Khashoggi, the University Health Network surgeon-in-chief, says it's believed the trip from Toronto Western Hospital was the first time lungs for transplant have been transported using a drone. But he and Unitaire Bioelectronique are convinced the method will become the norm as the race to get organs up in the sky heats up. Aside from the Quebec-based company, U.S. companies Mission Go, AD Airlines, Laris Pro Transport, and China's EHang are all working on making organ drone flights more common. A U.S. customs dispute at the U.S.-Canada border is threatening the U.S. supply of Alaska pollock. The fish are used for popular products like fish sticks and fast food sandwiches. After being caught, pollock is transported by ship to New Brunswick, near the U.S. border with Maine. The U.S. Customs and Border Agency alleges that shippers are violating the Jones Act. It requires goods shipped between U.S. ports to be transported on U.S.-owned ships. The dispute has left 26 million pounds of fish in Canadian cold storage. Parks Canada has confirmed wild pigs, which tear up landscapes and eat everything from roots to bird eggs to deer, are now regularly present in Elk Island National Park east of Edmonton. The pigs were brought to Canada in the 1990s as a farm diversification strategy. Some escaped, and scientists say they are now in half of Saskatchewan's rural municipalities and 28 Alberta counties. Ryan Brook at the University of Saskatchewan says the pigs are highly destructive to both native wildlife and their habitat. Canadian food banks faced a second pandemic-era Thanksgiving, and they say the pandemic's 4th wave have put a stop to large-scale events. This includes in-person food drives that are typically held at Thanksgiving. However, these drives are needed to keep the doors open year-round. Rachel Dixon, the Director of Development for Feed Ontario, a collective of hunger relief organizations, says demand is particularly worrying because financial donations have slowed. As government support for those affected by the pandemic tapers off, she says the food bank expects to see more people rely on it. The Nobel Prize for Outstanding Work in the field of economics has been awarded to Canadian David Card and two U.S.-based economists. The Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences praised the trio for reshaping empirical work in the economic sciences. Mr. Card says one of his new studies looked at how an increase in the minimum wage might affect hiring in two U.S. states. Mr. Card shares the honor with Joshua Angrists of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Guido Imbens of Stanford University. All right, we'll be right back after the break with a look at mental health in the workplace. Stay tuned. Nova Scotia's new progressive conservative government outlined a list of ways it plans to fix the ailing healthcare system in its first throne speech yesterday, and mental health was on the docket. The government says it will grant all Nova Scotians access to mental health services as part of what it says will be the most progressive mental health support system in Canada. Meanwhile, the issue of mental health in Canada has been a hot topic among political leaders, especially following World Mental Health Day on Sunday. But it's not only our political leaders that are concerned about mental health and addressing it within Canada. According to new research by Ipsos, 2/3 of Canadians believe we are in a mental health pandemic. Well, joining us now to talk more about mental health and stress, especially at the workplace, is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Thank you, Nima, and thank you for this topic.
Yes, it's a very important topic, Brendan, and you work in the world of business, finance, and investment, so we know stress is no stranger to you. So what have you seen lately in your field?
Well, it's interesting, Nima. Most people think that the stress in my business has to do with the markets going up and down. Oh, I couldn't imagine that kind of stress, the uncertainty of it. And well, there is an element of that. That actually isn't most of the stress. Most of the stress is interpersonal, dealing with people, whether clients or co-workers, helping them to achieve their hopes and dreams. One takes on a lot of stress from other people. So it's not the stress like a black swan is not what people think it is. It is a random event or a seemingly random event that isn't obvious, isn't what someone from the outside looking in might expect it to be.
That is a very interesting perspective, Brendan. What would you say are the consequences at the workplace or even in the world of investment if mental health issues are not addressed within it?
Well, mental health, I would say, is an inside job. Mental health is an inside job. And the important point is for me at least, is to developing a vocabulary around it, a way to be able to say to oneself and to the world around, hey, I'm not okay. Because even now, with all of the focus that's gone on mental health, there is a stigma around that, and it can take many forms. I think it's got particularly bad, if there's, for want of a better term, during COVID, as many people have talked about, because we've been so focused on work. There hasn't been appropriate boundaries between work and home, the usual shut-off valves that have allowed people to escape from the stresses they have at work or the stresses they have at home. The boundaries have been blurred and those escape valves are not functioning.
Now, that's a really good point there, Brendan. Too many people suffer in silence, especially when it comes to the workplace. What is your advice when it comes to addressing this issue?
Well, I think there's a few things. There are some basic things that I think we each need to do for ourselves. And it is, the term they've come up with is self-care. But what it used to mean is getting a decent night's sleep and eating properly and doing the basic things that we need to do to look after ourselves. Again, being at home for a year and a half, I think a lot of us have had a harder time now reacclimatizing with that. I think also being honest with oneself as to how one's actually feeling. As people who've been at the office, as I have for 18 months, see a whole bunch of people coming back that weren't there before, or if you've been at home, and now you're going back into the office environment, both situations can be stressful. And we may react rather than saying, what is it about this situation that I'm stressing about? I'm just using the return from COVID as an example. What is it about this situation that I'm actually stressing about? And expressing that to oneself and to another human being that one trusts. I think that's really important.
And something that can lead to stress is the feeling of being overwhelmed, especially at the workplace, Brendan. So how can individuals deal with this feeling of being overwhelmed?
I think it is very, very important to really be honest with oneself. The temptation to say, I'm all right, I'm all right, I'm all right, isn't healthy. I have a very dear friend who's just in the last couple of days had a heart attack, and he always would internalize the stress and say, I'm okay, I'm okay, I'm okay. It's not his fault he had a heart attack. It's just the stress around what we're dealing with through this last year and a half, and now this transition, this inflection point. I think one needs to be super, super aware of how you're actually feeling. And I think you'll find that people around you are going to be very understanding. I've encouraged and tried to help people cut each other some slack, because I think everybody's taken this COVID period with a degree of stress that we haven't really articulated to ourselves. And I think we need to begin to take stock of that to be healthier going forward, inside and out.
Some very important points there, Brendan. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, Nima, very much. Be well.
Residents of Alberta head to the polls for the municipal election on October 18th. This is where voters will also be able to vote on issues of public interest. And one referendum question is about Canada's commitment to equalization, which is currently a hot topic in Alberta. According to Alberta's provincial website, equalization gives federal funding to provinces less well off so that all provinces can provide a similar level of service to their citizens. This funding mainly comes from federal taxes and fees. The referendum is asking Albertans whether they think the principle of equalization payments should be removed from Canada's constitution. While the Alberta provincial government cannot force the federal government to act, it can start a discussion. And the Canadian Taxpayers Federation federal director says that is a much-needed conversation. He joins us now on Forum Daily. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily, Mr. Franco Terrazzano.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So let's start with a quick overview of this referendum. What is it about, and why is it a hot topic in Alberta?
Well, Albertans are tired of being treated like the cash cow for the rest of Canada. Since equalization was first started in 1957, equalization has cost Alberta taxpayers about $67 billion. This year alone, equalization will cost an Alberta family of four about $2,600. Now, what has all that money bought for Albertans? Well, hostility from the federal government towards its economic driver.
All right, sir, just about 4 minutes here. But before we move forward, can you briefly explain equalization to our viewers and why provinces have to pay equalization payments?
Yeah, equalization is a federal program, and it's sold to Canadians as a way so that provincial governments can provide reasonably similar level of programs across Canada. Now, that sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it forces provincial taxpayers like those in Alberta to directly subsidize politicians in other provinces like Quebec who seem intent on roadblocking their development.
All right, sir. So I'm going to jump to an article in the Toronto Sun. You indicate in it that the discussion on equalization is urgently needed. So why is that?
Yeah, this discussion is also needed all across Canada. We have to remember that this is a federal program and the federal government is $1 trillion in debt. And we've seen these equalization costs soaring. When it was first implemented in 1957, it cost about $1.3 billion. This year, it will cost about $21 billion. So a 1,500% increase. Now, with these massive additional costs, is it really making Canada better off? I would argue no. Not only does it harm taxpayers in provinces like Alberta, but it also harms taxpayers in provinces that receive equalization because it lets their politicians put in bad policies and rely more on tax dollars from other provinces and less on good, sound economic policies.
All right, sir. And you also say that the prairies have been dealing with economic hardships for the past 6 years. So that's even before the pandemic. Why is that?
That's correct. And, all Canadians have been struggling for the last 18 months or so with COVID-19, but Albertans have been struggling for the last 6+ years. And when many Alberta families may have been looking for a hand up, the federal government gave Alberta a boot to the neck, right? The feds have rejected the Northern Gateway pipeline. They moved the goalposts on the Energy East pipeline. They imposed a No More Pipelines law, a discriminatory tanker ban on the West Coast. The feds have imposed a carbon tax. They're getting ready for a second carbon tax. So to many Albertans who feel like they have over-contributed to the rest of Canada through their tax dollars, these policies certainly feel unfair.
So with the pandemic in play now, how does Alberta's economy compare to that of other provinces following these issues that you just mentioned?
Well, I think when we start talking about this economic recovery post pandemic, what we have to remember is that even after the pandemic, these roadblocks from the federal government are still going to be there for Alberta and also just our natural resource sector in Canada more broadly. So, if we want to get the economy firing on all cylinders again post pandemic, we need to see these roadblocks addressed. And really, that's why it's so important to have this national conversation.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, just about a minute left here, but the CTF has done some analysis on equalization as it relates to Alberta in particular. So what were some of the key findings here?
Yeah, so since its inception in 1957, equalization has cost Alberta taxpayers about $67 billion. And the last penny that Albertans have received from equalization was all the way back in 1965. This year, equalization will cost an Alberta family of four about $2,600. But we have to remember, equalization is only one of the federal programs that redistributes money away from Alberta taxpayers. If you look at all the money the federal government taxes and spends, well, then Albertans have paid about $600 billion more to Ottawa, and by extension, the other provinces, than they've received back in federal spending. And they still have politicians in these other provinces that want to roadblock their development, and that's just unfair.
All right, Mr. Terrazzano, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Hey, it was my pleasure.
All right, we'll be back after the break with a look at stories that happened around the world this week. Stay with us, right back on the Forum Daily Week in Review. Norway's domestic security agency says a bow and arrow attack that killed 5 people appears to have been an act of terrorism. A 37-year-old Danish man has been arrested as the suspect in the Wednesday night attack in Kongsberg, Norway. The police chief told a news conference that the victims were 4 women and 1 man between the ages of 50 and 70. Mass killings are rare in Norway, and the attack drew immediate comparisons with an attack by a right-wing domestic extremist who killed 77 people a decade ago. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has dissolved the lower house of parliament. Japan's first pandemic election will be held on October 31st. It will revolve around how to face a potential COVID-19 resurgence and economic revival. Also at stake is if and how Mr. Kishida's government can leave the shadow of a nearly 9-year rule of Abe Suga. Campaigning begins Tuesday. Mr. Kishida said he is seeking a mandate after being elected by Parliament only 10 days ago. The ruling coalition won about 2/3 of the chamber in the last election, but support has dropped over the pandemic response. The Turkish Foreign Ministry says a high-level delegation from Afghanistan's Taliban rulers has arrived in the country for opening talks. The meetings Thursday in Ankara were the first between the Taliban and senior Turkish government officials after the group seized control of Afghanistan. Turkey's president has advocated keeping the channels of dialogue with the Taliban open to patiently and gradually steer them toward establishing a more inclusive government. China and Russia are holding joint naval drills off the Russian Far East. The exercises, Joint Sea 2021, kicked off with a ceremony on Thursday in Russia's Peter the Great Gulf and will run through Sunday. While such exercises have been held before, Chinese state media reports say this is the first time China has sent anti-submarine warfare planes and destroyers for exercises abroad. Well, meanwhile, International Olympic Committee Vice President John Coates says challenging China on its human rights record ahead of the 2022 Winter Games is not in their remit. Mr. Coates said human rights were an important part of the fundamental principles of the Olympics. However, quote, "We have no ability to go into a country and tell them what to do." The U.S. government says it expects American households to see increases of up to 54% for their heating bills this season from last winter. The prediction comes as prices are surging worldwide for heating oil, natural gas, and other fuels. The U.S. government says the sharpest increases are likely for homes that use propane. But it says those heated by natural gas, which make up nearly half of all U.S. households, may spend 30% more than a year ago. This as forecasters are predicting a colder winter. The head of the Chicago Police Officers Union has called on members to defy the city's requirement to report their COVID-19 vaccination status by the weekend or be placed on unpaid leave. In the video posted online this week, Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara vowed to take Mayor Lori Lightfoot's administration to court if it tries to enforce the mandate. Mr. Catanzara suggested if the city does enforce its mandate and many union members don't comply, Chicago's police force will be at 50% or less this weekend. Armed clashes have broken out during a protest in Lebanon against the lead judge investigating last year's massive blast in the city's port. The protest was called by Hezbollah and its allies who are demanding that the removal of the judge. At least 6 people were killed and dozens were wounded in the most violent street fighting in Beirut in years. Disaster response officials in the Philippines say a tropical storm has left at least 19 people dead. Authorities say they are still investigating another 11 deaths that may have been caused by the tropical storm Kompasu when it passed over the northern tip of the island nation on Monday. Another 14 people have been reported missing in the Philippines. Kompasu also left 1 person dead in Hong Kong as it reached typhoon strength while crossing the open sea on Wednesday. United Airlines employees who are suing the airline over its vaccine mandate will get more time to make their case. A federal judge in Texas ordered United not to place unvaccinated employees on unpaid leave. This if they are seeking a medical or religious exemption from mandatory vaccination against COVID-19. The judge said he was acting because United's promise not to act against unvaccinated employees will expire before he can issue a ruling in the case. Social media is being blamed for contributing to a global rise in anti-Semitism. Government and technology company representatives attending the International Forum on Holocaust Remembrance in Sweden vowed Wednesday to crack down on hate speech, disinformation, and the denial of facts both online and in real life. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news from this past week. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for updates. Take care, Canada.